Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Congratulations. 13th conference is not a trivial matter at all. Yes, I know the kind of work that must have gone into making something like this work online, but nevertheless, it is precisely the online medium that permits me or your colleague from Edinburgh to participate. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you to all of you for being here. Before I share my screen and my presentation, I'd just like to quickly say the kinds of things I'm planning to do quickly in the time that's available. The first is to zip through a kind of overview of Esperanto, what it is, how it sounds like, and so on. But in the latter part, a little later, perhaps a little more focus on the nuances of the conference title of what is it that we can learn about language as a human capacity, as a human ability, as a species property, from thinking about Esperanto, and what is it that we can learn about a language in the world, which has a deeply humanistic purpose of bringing people together as humans. What kinds of responsibilities or what kinds of focus such an enterprise should also have. So some of these are open questions, obviously, and this is still very much a work in progress. And as ma'am was saying, it's 137 years old, 135 years old, the language. So it's not new, but it's nothing like any of our in our multilingual reality, any of our languages, which are much, much older. So in itself, it is interesting that there should be a phenomenon like Esperanto, and that it flourishes is an even more remarkable fact. So with that kind of preface, let me share my presentation and take it from there. Maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes of the presentation, and then we'll open it up for a conversation. I look forward to hearing from you all. Just a moment, please. Yeah. I'm assuming that things are okay, and then you can actually see the screen that I want you to see. If it's not the case, please alert me. Right now, I can't see any of you. So a large claim, seeing afresh the word and the world. 20 minutes are hardly enough to do any justice to it, but let's see how far we can go. A quick what, why, so, and so on. What is it? A planned language, Esperanto, is a planned language for international communication. Why should anyone be interested in it? It's easy to learn and fun. And so what happens? Well, you get friends from all these wonderful places, strange, faraway places, without expecting them to have spent years learning, say, struggling with English, as often happens in our country, and not being particularly successful at it. Our room, this conference is no indication, right, of just how difficult people all over the world find another foreign language, in this case English, but in other colonial contexts, post-colonial contexts, French, Spanish, these are major barriers for people, post-colonial peoples everywhere, right? And there is an additional benefit of promoting intercultural dialogue. The conversations my Brazilian friends often include this puzzled question: what is this Indian thing called arranged marriage? This is serious dialogue. This is far beyond bread and butter minimum language, right? So minimum language, let me just give you a quick example of how it sounds. Mia nomo estas Giridhar. Mi estas de Bengaluru. Bengaluru estas la ĉefurbo de la lando parto Karnataka. Karnataka estas en suda Barato, southern India, Bharat, Barato. Barato estas granda lando en la kontinento Azio. I'm sure you understood all of that without any effort. You must have also noticed that the O's, barato, lando, chef urbo, all nouns in this language end in O, all. Similarly, granda lando, big country, granda, adjective, all adjectives end in A. Estas, mi estas, Giridhar, mia urbo estas, Bengaluru. Estas is in present tense. Estis is past tense. Estos is future tense. And the same thing goes for all verbs. Manjis, manjas, at the moment, manjis, ate, and manjos, will eat. Dormas, sleeps, dormis, and dormos. So a regular language, a language with the regularity of parts of speech and regularity of structure, which makes it easier, quite far easier to learn than many other languages. We'll see a little more of that as we go on later in this talk. This is the man who designed this language, Zamenhof, Zamenhof, born in 1859, the year, incidentally, that Macaulay died. There's no connection, of course. And 1917, Zamenhof dies, so just over a century ago. And at the height of the First World War. So here was a man who designed a language explicitly to bring humanity together, and then more or less disappointed and heartbroken in 1917 at the massacre happening in Europe then. So interesting to think about that as well. And yet the language that he has designed and given us seems to be doing quite well. What about his own language profile? He spoke Russian, Polish, and German fluently, Yiddish, French, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and English less well, some knowledge of Spanish and Lithuanian and Volapük. In 1887, July 1887, he published La Unua Libro. Now, you Esperantists will understand that Unua ends in an A, must be an adjective, libro, book ends in an O, must be a noun, La Unua Libro. Some original poetry he wrote, but he also did a considerable amount of translation. The Old Testament, Hamlet, Goethe, Heine, Schiller, Gogol, a range of material. Not technical manuals, you notice, not engineering manuals of medical texts, but poetry and literature. There was apparently a very strong belief that if it doesn't sound good, if it doesn't work well as aesthetically, it's not likely to be taken up at all. I mentioned in the previous slide this language, Spanish, Lithuanian, and Volapük. Volapük, yes, Volapük was another plant language designed a decade earlier, initiated a decade earlier by a priest, a Jesuit called Schleyer. So Esperanto was certainly not the first planned language. No. There are over 1,000 such projects through human history. Just imagine that, 1,000 such projects. Here's a list of planned languages, starting only with the letter A. I don't even know how the first one is pronounced. Awanian, Eble, perhaps, I don't know. Right up to A's. And this list is from the Esperanto Wikipedia, Listo de Planlingvoj, list of planned languages. Esperanto, in fact, has turned out to be a repository, a place where a lot of information about other projects is to be found. So if you're interested in constructed languages, planned languages of various kinds, Esperanto is one place where your research can begin. A vast amount of information is available about other projects, how they work, why they don't work, what are the social features of those communities, and so on. Ease of learning. So let's see a little more about what I mean by this. Take the word for horse in Esperanto. It's a noun, so it must end in an O. Cavallo. C with a hat is a ch, cho. Cavallo. Female, cavallino. Baby, cavalido. Female baby, cavalidino. Place of, cavaleio. J is pronounced like a Y, as in German and Germanic languages, many. Cavaleio, and horse-like is cavala, adjective, right? So notice the regularity of it. Cavallo, cavalino, cavalito, cavalidino, cavaleio, and cavala. If you were to say that I know the word family for horse in English, you would need at least to know these words, right? Horse, stallion, mare, foal, colt, filly, stable, horse-like, and equine. 9 words, 9 spellings, 9 etymologies, 9 reasons for a nightmare, different kind of mare. So this ease of learning, this ease of using the affixes, and the same thing can be done with Elefanto. So Elefantejo would be a place of an elephant, wherever that is, a grove perhaps, I don't know where, perhaps a forest, right? Elefanta is elephant-like, elephantine, right? So the same series, you can see how effective the word formation is. I don't even need to know a separate word for shed. Chavaleo, elefantejo, hundejo, hundo is dog. Hundejo would be a kennel, a place where a dog lives, right? Or a house, maybe. Some more suffixes. The suffixes and prefixes together are called affixes, as you know, afiksoj. Arbo is a tree. Arboreal, the English word. Arbaro, AR is the suffix for a group of things. So arbaro becomes a forest. And analogously, vortaro is a dictionary. Homaro, Homo sapiens, humanity, right? You can see how effective strategy for word formation this is. Il is a tool, IL. So scribi is to write. Scribilo is a pen. Scribilaro, combine the 2 suffixes. Il for the tool and AR for collection. Scribilaro, stationery, a bunch of things you need to write with, pen, paper, erasers, etc. These suffixes can become words in themselves, another interesting property. So IN, as you saw from Chavalino, number 2 here on this slide, Chavalino, IN becomes a word. Ino becomes the word for female. Ido becomes the word for child. Aro becomes the mathematical set, as in set theory, Venn diagrams. Ilo becomes a tool, Ao becomes a place. So the words themselves can become, the affixes themselves can become words, lexical affixes. And in fact, they can combine. The standard word for feminism in Esperanto is inismo, inismo. Ilaro is the standard word for toolkit. One consequence of that is that John Wells's English Esperanto, Esperanto English bidirectional dictionary, which I have a copy of here, as it happens. There you go. The dictionary has only 10,300 entries in Esperanto, headwords entries, but 22,000 in 22,300 in English. So these 10,300 words with the standard suffixes are quite enough to express those 22,000 English words. So the English section is much thicker as a result. So one consequence is a much more effective use of resources, linguistic resources. The compounds are particularly useful. The word for friend is amico, female friend, amichino, just friends. But if it was a special kind of friend, friends with benefits, I guess, well, you'll have to bring the heart into it somewhere. And coro is the word for heart. So cor amico is boyfriend, and cor amichino is girlfriend, specifically, right? So the compounds offer quite a lot of nuance, quite a lot of complexity to the language. Quick to learn, easy to learn is one other claim being made for Esperanto. These English, French, Chinese take way long, as we all know, those who have struggled with foreign languages. Esperanto, how long? Well, the basic French and German, the Alliance Française and the Goethe Institute, their websites say 100 to 200 hours of classes plus homework. Basic Esperanto, 40 hours maximum. So moderate effort, but huge returns. Now you can actually begin to answer that question. Familie arrangita exigo. A marriage, a wedding, a marriage arranged by the family. That's what an arranged marriage is. That's how you would start describing it to your Brazilian friend. Last night, in fact, I was chatting with a Brazilian friend, and I told him that tomorrow I'll be speaking to college students and colleagues about Esperanto, and that room, the online room that we were in, had people from a dozen countries. this Brazilian, there was an Italian, a couple of Germans, a couple of French guys, all chatting about complex everyday stuff, not just my name is not that level alone. So it actually worked quite well as a for a good hour or so. But it's more than that, is it not? It's about this idea of linguistic democracy, is it not? The fact that that Brazilian has taken the trouble to learn Esperanto, and so have I. He neither expects me to learn Brazilian Portuguese in order to be able to speak to him, nor do I expect him to spend years learning Hindi. And he certainly doesn't know any English. He doesn't need it. The higher education in Brazil is in Portuguese, isn't their mother tongue. So in large parts of the world, beyond a very basic English, people just don't need English. It's a myth to claim that everywhere it is used widely. Of course, it is used widely. That's true, but widely in the English-speaking parts of the world, and elsewhere it is fairly optional and very, very uneven. English language skills are very uneven. So this project, the Esperanto project, is about linguistic democracy, is it not? And otherwise, the world language order currently is something like the following, right? I mean, the current linguistic order expects you to learn someone else's language for years together, and even then achieve only a moderate amount of fluency and ability in that language. So such an arrangement is fundamentally undemocratic, is it not? That you learn someone else's language, spend years doing so, and then do so only imperfectly. Once again, this conference is not typical at all of the situation in India. This is such an important idea that let me say it again, but this time let me say it in another language. Let me say it in Hindi. आज की भाषा प्रणाली कुछ इस तरह की है कि कुछ लोगों को जन्म से फायदा पहुंचाती है और बाकियों से ये चाहती है कि वो सालों भर की कोशिश करें, वर्षों भर का प्रयास करें, और किस लिए? एक मामूली काबिलियत हासिल करने के लिए, एक साधारण योग्यता प्राप्त करने के लिए। ऐसी भाषा प्रणाली तो बुनियादी तौर पर अलोकतांत्रिक है. It's fundamentally undemocratic. So this is a movement for linguistic democracy. When we think about world languages and communicative justice in the world, right? We need to ask some hard questions, difficult questions. And Esperanto is one of the places where these questions are addressed. Take another asymmetry in the world's traffic of cultural traffic. This one is about translation. UNESCO maintains an index of translations between 57 and 66, 1957 and 66. This about 70% of the translations were just from these big four languages: English, French, German, and Russian. 70%. All the world's other languages accounted for only 30% of the translations. So these big four provided 70% of the source texts because they are big. They're big languages, right? But it's a completely skewed distribution. In Esperanto, the number of translations are, of course, far smaller than the UNESCO index gives us. But the proportion is almost exactly inverse. Between 1957 and 66, there were just 304 translations, but half of those were from Chinese, Vietnamese, Dutch, and Japanese. This is in the 1950s, 60s. Yeah. A more recent figure, between 1991 and 2003, only 30% came from the big four out of 1,000 or so translations. And there were 5% each from these languages: Yiddish, Portuguese, Polish, Chinese, Japanese, Hungarian. So you actually get, in an Esperanto reading world, you are exposed to literature from completely from cultures that you normally wouldn't encounter at all in your usual diet of translated works, translated literature. So the traffic is far more culturally equitable in Esperanto. So another example of a larger question to do with language and culture, which Esperanto takes seriously on board and tries to do something about it. And Translations include such as these: Asteriks, Cela Olimpiaj Ludoj, Asteriks at the Olympic Games. Lovely translation, hilarious. That humor should work, and verbal humor of this order, as you know, Asteriks is often quite difficult to think of translating, and yet the Esperanto translations work beautifully. I found myself loving the Esperanto one, and then going back to the English one to say, oh, did they do it differently? Yes, they did it differently, because their source text was not the French translation. It was the original, sorry, it was not the English translation, it was the French original. So the decisions made are pretty interesting. How does one learn? How does one get to dive into this at least? Well, there's a free website called Lernu, which translates to let us learn, lernu.net. That's one place. And of course, there is Duolingo, quite well known as a platform for learning languages, and Esperanto among them. So what does the community look like after 130 whatever years? Well, there is the World Esperanto Association, Universala Esperanto Asocio. I'm a member of that, headquartered in Rotterdam at the moment. 18,000 members in 111 countries. One of the previous presidents of this was my mentor, Prabal Dasgupta, who's now in Kolkata. Over 800,000 active learners on Duolingo. Active learners are apparently those who have opened the app and worked or done something on it in the last 3 months. There's some parameter, but quite a large number. About 150 to 200 books are published every year, which is not bad at all for a small language. There's the Esperanto Wikipedia, which is pretty big. It's one of the biggest Wikipedias with 3 lakh articles, 300,000 articles. Every year there's an annual conference. In 2018, before the pandemic, there was one in Lisbon, then the 104th, 103rd, 104th. So for a long time, this community has had the experience of coming together for a week or 10 days every year in some place in the world, right? And basically spending that entire week or 10 days entirely in Esperanto. 103rd, 104th was in Finland. Last couple of ones had to be online, of course. The 107th in 2022, next year, is in Montreal. And there are flourishing online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Eternity. So it is a fairly vibrant community, and we have a small group in Bengaluru also, called Berro, which is a nice way to say berry also. Blackberry, blueberry, berry, Berro. Bengaluru Esperanto Rencontillo. The Indian Esperanto Association was set up in 1982 and has been puttering along. You may not have heard of it, but that's the way community is small in India. And here's a group of us meeting up in Cubbon Park, a lovely place, lovely people. That little book, the green book that she has in her hand, Suchitra has in her hand, is The Giving Tree, a translation of Silverstein's classic, The Giving Tree, in Esperanto. So I began with some bread and butter Esperanto, mia nomo estas, mi estas de Bengaluru, Bengaluru estas, etc. Let me, towards the end with some gourmet Esperanto. So let's do a couple of gourmet dishes. What is more gourmet than poetry, right? So here's a sample. It's a verse by Fez in an English translation, and then in my Esperanto translation. The original goes, Raat yu dil mein teri khoi hui yaad aayi. Raat yu dil mein teri khoi hui yaad aayi. जैसे वीराने में चुपके से बाहर आ जाए, जैसे सहराओं में हौले से चले बाद नसीम, जैसे बीमार को बेवजह करार आ जाए, बेवजह जीनियस आदमी था. Last night your faded memory filled my heart, like spring's calm advent in the wilderness, like the soft desert footfalls of the breeze, like peace somehow coming to one in sickness. This is Victor Kiernan's translation. And the Esperanto, Nocte venis en la coron via memoro, kiel en sovageion quieta printempo, kiel en deserton lanta vento, kiel al malsanul ial pazzo. One last piece of gourmet, Shakespeare. Yeah, the famous Sonnet 18, as an example for an English conference also, right? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds to shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and oft is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou own'st, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. This has been translated at least twice into Esperanto, as far as I know. My translation, or the translation I'm going to recite, is by Reto Rossetti, who an Italian Esperantist who spent many years in the UK. Sonetto de Coq de Shakespeare, traducita de Reto Rossetti. Ciu mi comparu vin al tag somera, vi estas ja pli bela cae serena, mai floroin ofte vipas vent severa, cae tro maldauras la somero bena. Ien brulas la oculo del cielo, ien vualigas gia vido ora, cae iam senbeligas ciu belo, la voi natura au pro fatrigora. Sed iam ne velcos via plen somero, but thy eternal summer shall not fade. Sed iam ne velcos via plen somero, nec declinigios del bellezzo nuna. La morto vin ne tenos con fiero, se vin la vers eterna gardas iuna. Dum homo spiros, cae oculoi vidos, vivante en vivanta vers visidos. Thank you. Questions, comments, queries, agreements, disagreements?
Thank you for such a beautiful renditions, and it was wonderful experience, sir.
Thank you.
Very, very novice, ignorant with the language, and still able to, just enjoy it, flow with the flow. I think that's the beauty of the language. So thank you so much for that final 10 minutes. Would love to have questions, comments from the audience.
Oops.
You may put it on the chat box, or if you just would like to directly ask sir, then unmute yourself and just interact with sir.
Dr. Rao, thank you for this wonderful presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The language, since I know a little bit of French, seemed to have the French influence because, manger and all that kind of thing you mentioned. And it's so very wonderful. Yes, and easy to understand, I think. And
yes.
Certainly,
right? Certainly, if you know French, it is much easier. About 70% of the root words, the radicoi, about 70% of those come from the Romance languages, the Latin-derived languages, French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian. And about 30% come from Germanic roots, and a smaller percentage from Slavic roots.
Slavic, right, that's right. So this ending in O is, I think, very typical of the Italian language, isn't it? It's not so much, you don't see so much in French.
Yes, true. It's not even in Italian. There are many O ending words in many languages, especially in the Romance languages.
Right.
But, the regularity is not is not insisted on in other languages, right? Esperanto insists on it. If it is an Esperanto noun, it has to end in O.
Okay, yeah. Good, excellent. When we were young, we used to speak something called the P language. I don't know. So it just reminded me of that. Since you're insisting on the O, I had in fact mentioned it to my students. They used to say we should have a P language for those who are not in the group to use, so that they wouldn't understand. Yeah, I don't know if Dr. Susan and Dr. Preeti use that P language.
We used to have that, and we used to use it for our just internal communication, kind of a coded something,
coded language,
some secret this thing. But then yes, it was fun to do that. Of course, it was a very, very amateur way to do it. But yes, ma'am, we agree that it was.
Yeah.
When we used to be in the universities, yes. Sir, there is a question in the chat box.
There are a couple of them.
Yeah, there are some questions, and I mean very interesting questions. Amol is putting first question, sir. And Amol is asking, what is the scope of this language in future?
Not easy to say, because some of it is obscure, right? We don't know what the future will bring. So, for example, if one of the claims of the language is that the Brazilian and the Indian can communicate without having to learn each other's language. Now, suppose 10 years from now, technology can do that just as well. I really don't need to learn Brazilian Portuguese. I speak in Hindi into my phone, and my Brazilian friend understands it in Portuguese, and conversely speaks in Portuguese, and I understand in Hindi. So if technology can solve that fundamental problem of basic communication, for example, then Esperanto will have to rethink, right? I mean, it claims that it forms a bridge language, which was true in a pre-technological world. So it will need to, in that sense, we don't know where it will go. But at another level, think of this, that look at the attempt of a language which also tries to bring people together. And ask yourself, are the big languages in India or elsewhere in the world, are they doing that? Or are they insisting that other people learn their language, and they themselves do very little to learn anyone else's language? Bengaluru is full of friends from IT workers from Gurgaon, from Delhi, who've lived here for a decade and have not picked up even basic Kannada. They don't think they need it. English speakers, have you heard native speakers of English speaking Tamil or Telugu or Kannada? Very few, hardly any. So there is a massive asymmetry of power, and Esperanto is trying to address that. So in that sense, it may be an interesting thing to keep track of and understand how language and power work. So I don't know if that answers your question about the scope of the language, future of the language. But for me, it has opened a lot of doors of equal communication. I thought I had the keys of the world in my pocket because I knew English. And then I discovered these whole bunch of friends who are now lifelong friends, whom I wouldn't have been able to communicate with in English at all. They just don't need it. So in that sense, it is really a bridge building language between cultures and communities. And heaven knows we need dialogue, right? In this time of in this day and age, we badly need intercultural dialogue. And here is a resource for that, where people with moderate effort can actually participate in a serious conversation about women's rights, about terrorism, about environmental pollution, all of which are international issues. They're not specific to India or anything. Sorry, long answer, but I think just sort of laying out this. Since we are thinking about nuance in the conference, I thought much more than just English should be part of our thinking. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, very rightly put. And then I think India, we are already, we have always been struggling with that language politics. Maybe it's a 2-language formula, 3-language formula, it's best for the new education policy. And of course, when we put it in a little macrocosm, the global concept, maybe English versus the Oriental also is like a very ongoing, subtly, conflicting kind of a equation. Again, China removing itself earlier from English and then now coming all the way, entering into that English, equation. I think this particular way to look at it, like very secular, I can say, very non kind of bias thing. It's a very wonderful way to reach out for this intercultural, exchanges. Very wonderfully put, sir. Thank you. So there is one more question from Sasha. She's asking whether is this an official language of any country? Sir, you're muted. Please unmute yourself.
Sorry. Yes. No, it is not an official language in any country. It is part of the educational system in several countries. You can get, just as you can learn a foreign language in Hungary, for example, you can learn French and get a certification of competence in French. You can do that with Esperanto as well. In a few countries, in a few places in the world, it's one of the foreign languages that can be learned at a university. But otherwise, the political will to make it official in any sense hasn't happened. So there are declarations, nice words from various places such as UNESCO about Esperanto, but that's about it. For the rest, it works on a people-to-people basis of communication.
There's no literature then on Esperanto.
Oh, there's vast amounts of literature.
I mean, in sense of novels and okay.
150 to 200 books are published every year, and half of those are original writing. About half of those are translations.
Oh, excellent.
So yeah, so I've been translating Gandhi's autobiography and
into Esperanto. Oh, I see. Wow.
I've translated Affairs and Manto as well.
Oh,
so there's especially since, as I said, for my European friends and my Western friends who speak Esperanto, Japanese friends who speak Esperanto, all of them have been inundated with translations from these big 4 or 5 languages. So hardly anyone knows has read any Urdu literature, for example. So it becomes one more way of bringing your culture to the table, to the conversation,
Very interesting, sir. Maybe I think this works as in favor of Esperanto as the language, as it is not yet established as a official language of any country. Maybe this is also giving a kind of a very free flow exchange to all these literary translations.
And it's conscious. So yes, you're right. So if Germany were to adopt Esperanto as one of its major platforms for transmitting German culture, we'd be flooded with state-sponsored or state-supported publishing industry publishing in German material in Esperanto.
Yes.
Yes.
It works in favor of this language, I guess. Yes. One more question, sir. How does it support English language? Tina is asking this question.
That's
and in between, there is one query about, can you please put that website to learn Esperanto, sir?
Lernu.net.
Yes.
Just a moment. I've just typed it in the chat box. Check it out. How does it support English? It supports English by asking English to think a little bit more about its role. So it supports English by asking difficult questions, saying, are you a language that is fair? If not, can you be fair? Can English? Can you please be fair? What does fairness look like in language? So for example, as English teachers, people teaching the language and working in the education space, all of us, 30, 40 years ago in India, there was a huge emphasis on speaking English the way the British speak it, or something like that, that there is an RP, received pronunciation, towards which you are working towards. Currently, there is much less emphasis on that in English pedagogy in India, because we recognize that there is a legitimate variety called an Indian English, or Indian Englishes, if you like, and world Englishes generally. So the pedagogic emphasis, the emphasis on teaching it the way, or hearing it the way we think they do, that has changed. And that is in some sense an opening up of English, right? To say that, okay, there is a legitimate variety in India where people speak differently, and there is intercomprehension. Now, Esperanto asks you to think like that, to think about inclusion, to think about fairness, to think about politeness, to think about cultural assumptions, because it's constantly doing it for itself. So English speakers who learn Esperanto actually become a little more sensitive because they realize that, there are serious demands being made on other people to learn their language. Likewise, my French friends who learn Esperanto, my Spanish friends who learn Esperanto, become less colonial in their thinking about language and power. So in that sense, it, I think, supports English by asking English to do some difficult thinking.
Structure-wise, I think the English language and the foreign languages follow the same structure grammatically.
Well, no, they're quite different, right? I mean, maybe I didn't understand you. For example,
When we first studied English grammar, we had the accusative and dative case and that kind of thing. So, would you say that the structure of the language would be, in that sense, similar to the European structure? Perhaps it would be, wouldn't it?
It was deliberately simplified, the language. So there is an accusative marker in Esperanto. So the equivalent of the ko in Hindi, billi ne chuhe ko khaya.
Yeah.
The ko is the marker for that it's the victim, right? Something is being done to it. So there is a similar particle, the letter N indicates that the rat is the victim in that story, in that sentence. Lakato manjis la raton. So because of that accusative marker, raton, because of that N, word order in Esperanto is much more flexible. So you can begin the sentence with the raton, la raton lakato manjis. So long as the N is indicating who's the victim, there's no confusion. Unlike in English, which is relatively rigid word order because there is no marker. The cat ate the rat. You can't interchange it. The meaning changes. So in that sense, there is much greater flexibility. And this comes in very useful for my Japanese Esperantist friends, my Chinese Esperantist friends, because the word order in their languages is not the English subject, verb, object word order. And so they find Esperanto sentences much easier to form without errors because of this little thing called the accusative marker. So in that sense, it frees up the ability to speak Esperanto using a word order that is from your own language. So you don't leave your language at the door the way we often ask our children to do so in schools in India. Leave your language outside, it's like footwear. Esperanto is saying in this temple of modernity, please bring it in, please bring it in. It is a resource, we will use it. So proverbs from your own languages please translate them into Esperanto so that we can use them and so on. So there's much greater, simply a sense that just open up the space more. And I found it quite liberating after all the rules that I had to learn for being an English speaker. This was quite liberating as an attitude towards language learning. So it was a pleasure to learn the language. It was not a chore. It was not a burden.
We have been exposed, I've been exposed for the first time to this Esperanto. And I'm sure since our students here are with us, they'll also find that this might be the language of the future. Who knows?
It's certainly the language of the present for me. I use it because of the internet now. It's like I said, I mean, I could be in a chat room yesterday for a couple of hours. There was another talk happening in the London Esperanto Club last night, and there was a speaker from the United States speaking about Hebrew, the structure of Hebrew, and so on. So otherwise, these are things that I would hardly hear about. A couple of weeks ago, there was a talk again there in the Antwerp Club on names of microbes. Why would anyone? Somebody was interested in it. So you get exposed to a lot of interesting material from across the world.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much. Really very interesting.
You're welcome.
Susan, would you like to ask?
Yeah. Dr. Rao, I'm wondering, you said Esperanto has been around for more than 100 years. Why do you think, and despite it being simpler, as you said, structurally and in other ways, and free of, this ideological baggage and very kind of idealistic in its, in its objectives and all of that, why do you think it has not made the kind of, global presence that it should have? I mean, the only reason we are hearing about it now is because you are here.
Well, it's not surprising.
And this is also the generation of the internet. I mean, I don't think any of my students have ever heard of this either.
Yeah. Well, it's not surprising actually. We have an illusion that information flows freely. In fact, if I visit only half a dozen websites for my news consumption, and there are millions out there. There are hundreds of thousands of websites. So actually, the fact that I have invested so much time and effort in learning English well has also meant that I have not invested anything like that time into finding out about other initiatives. So the doors that English has opened for me, other doors have closed because of the same process of so much time and effort. If there is no state backing, it's very, very hard for something to come into public consciousness. So if you think about it, where would Esperanto information come to you from? How would you even know about it? So there are, as I said, 300,000 articles in the Wikipedia in Esperanto. But what is 300,000? It's a drop in a very big ocean of information. So it's not surprising that we have not heard of it. I'm just wondering just how many other such initiatives there are all over the world, which I don't know about either. Simply because I am on a planet with 24 hours a day, and there's a focus. Also, as a matter of comparison, 130 years is not very much in the history of a language, and for a language with one speaker 130 years ago, if there are as I said, 8 lakh or 10 million users of Esperanto at whatever level today, we don't know. We actually don't have a worldwide census. We don't know. Language numbers are in any case difficult, but we don't know. If there are a million, let us say, or 100,000 even, that's a substantial increase in numbers, right? 100,000 fold. You can do the same kind of math about books in Esperanto. So although it seems small, maybe the progress has not been as insignificant as we think. At least that's how it seems to me. But you're right, a very large amount of my effort in the last 20, 30 years in India has been to say something like this exists. Even that is news for a lot of educated people, a lot of people who are otherwise quite well informed about the world. I'm not talking about provincial experiences. I'm talking about urban experiences like ours. Even there, just introducing that something like this exists is news. We may be running out of time. I'm just sort of
Sir, I was just about to remind you as a moderator of this session, the most difficult duty is to just stop or maybe interrupt that interaction.
Perfectly.
But sir, it's a pleasure to have you with us, sir. And in fact, you have opened up so many other areas of queries, and then I'm sure our participants today would like to explore this area in future. And so we would like to connect to you in case of any specific queries from our participants.
Yes.
And, thank you so much for being with us today, sir. And looking forward to many more such pleasurable, conversations with you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.